So the other things that affect the pitch or the intonation of the guitar, if your guitar has a very high action, that classical guitar strings are very susceptible to the stretching component more so than steel string guitar. So when you push a string down, it stretches it slightly. So if you were to have a fret right under that string in its straight condition and you just touched it down to the fret, that would be a certain pitch. When you push it down like that, it stretches the string a little bit, so you do get a tiny bit of sharpening of that particular note. So generally it's not noticeable, but until the action gets up over 5 or 6 millimeters, and then it can potentially start to become a bit of a problem. So what I was saying earlier about the thirds, that the interval of the thirds is the one which often shows up the most. Thirds and major sixths are actually the most, the tones which are the most affected by intonation. That is, may sound out to your ear. So if you've long been a guitar player, often you'll notice when you tune up your guitar, you play an E chord, and that G sharp will sound sharp. So it is sounding a little bit sharp. And then if you play the A chord, the C sharp may sound a little bit sharp. Sometimes the F sharp will sound sharp, the third in the key of D. And if you've got a guitar, you're trying to tune it up, sometimes you can be chasing your tail, trying to get all the thirds to sound really sweet. And some guitars simply seem to be easier to tune. They just seem to be more forgiving, they'll sound more in tune. Others, you're forever chasing your tail, trying to get the guitar in tune. But there is a certain amount of out of tuneness that we just need to live with. But if you're recording, the out of tuneness can become more of an issue than when it's being played live. When we're playing live, the average, apart from if it's terribly out of tune, the audience will of course know. But in the passing of music and time, as people are listening, a lot of out of tuneness goes unnoticed unless it's really bad. But when you're recording, where you're listening back, then a little bit of out of tuneness can really just ruin a take, or just be a bit unpleasant when you're listening to it over and over again. So it is, when it comes to tuning our classical guitars, what I encourage you to do, and this is just my view and opinion, you may have other thoughts and ideas, but you can use electronic tuners, of course, and I use an electronic tuner to get into the ballpark. But then you may find with the guitar, it's very helpful to just fine-tune the instrument according to your ear, and particularly according to the key that you're playing in. If you're playing a song in E, you may choose to just drop that G string just a little bit, so that when you play that third on the G sharp there with your index finger, it sounds a little bit more in tune. Once you start compensating with thirds, you may find that you'll start to get inaccuracies in other chords. So it can become a bit of a rabbit hole if you start doing that. But other times when you record tunes, I know I've had to do this many times, and I've done a lot of recording on nylon string guitar as well as other guitars. And sometimes there'll just be a note that sits there out of tune, and then I've gone back and sometimes just retuned the guitar very slightly, and I've just overdubbed that chord or that note back in, just to make it a little bit sweeter sounding, just to get away from that sense of out of tuneness. Okay, so that kind of covers a lot of the elements of the guitar itself. The other thing that is very important is the quality of the strings. So really old strings, they can lose their capacity for intonation after a while. Also, the quality and the roundness of the string really affects its intonation. So poor quality strings, and there are some brands which are simply not as good quality as other strings, because in the creation process of the string is not uniformly round. It may have different hints of diameters in it through the length of the string. And if the string is inaccurate, what that introduces is overtones into the string, which then produce additional tones that are not in sync with the fundamental tone itself. So I've had strings where you put it on and you're suddenly finding it very hard to tune. And see, it's sharp, it's flat, it's sharp, it's flat, it's sharp, and it's what on earth's going on? But when you then listen very carefully to the string, instead of it being a pure note, you can hear another note in it. So what that is that the roundness of the string, or maybe some other factor, is introducing an overtone a couple of cents out. It's usually up the octave or 2 octaves higher than what that note is, which then interferes with the sound of the string, so that you start hearing other notes mixed in with it, which are unpleasant and not pure. So if that happens to you, then you can certainly obviously got to throw the string out. And I had a series of strings from a well-known string maker, and I had at least 5 packs of that string where the E1 string had overtones in it, and I could not use it. I just threw them out one after another after another. So it must have been just a bad batch of strings that came out. I stopped buying that string, which was one of my favourite strings, for a couple of years, and I came back to it, and it seems that the issue seemed to be resolved. So I even contacted the manufacturer about it, and they, of course, said nobody's made any mention of that. I mean, they said they'd send me half a dozen free strings, and instead of sending me E1s, they sent me half a dozen E6 strings. So anyway, at least they tried to make amends for it. So strings can make a big difference. The quality of the nut and the nut slots can make a difference. You can end up with overtones and sitaring and all sorts of other funny tonal effects. So you need to have really good, clean and precise nut slots that are free from debris and grunge and all that sort of stuff. You can also have overtones coming from within the guitar itself, from the bracing. You may have a loose brace. Sometimes guitars, because they do resonate with overtones and harmonics, that sometimes you can get intonation problems from the body of the guitar. And if you're suspecting that may be the case, what the best thing to do is to get like a piece of cardboard or something and just cover the sound hole. That actually stops then the sound of the guitar coming straight out and interfering with the sound of the strings. And if it sounds more in tune with that sound hole covered, then what it means is that the body resonance or the body frequency of the guitar is interfering with the pitch of some of the strings. So that can happen occasionally. So makers of guitars actually do tune the body cavity, usually to a pitch, a fairly inert sort of a pitch like G sharp or maybe F sharp, that then helps the guitar to not resonate and cause intonation issues. Some people maintain that they like to have the body cavity tuned to a C, but I don't think that's too risky, having a fundamental that's so close to the main note of the guitar, because you don't need to be very far out on your tuning for it to start interfering with your guitar. So that covers a lot of the guitar. Then there's the technique thing. So the reason that we learn to play it properly is not simply to be able to play music, but it's also to play with a technique that puts sufficient pressure on the strings to bring the strings down to the fret, but doesn't mangle and stretch the chords and strings into out of tuneness. It doesn't take much. Doesn't take much to push a classical guitar string out of tune. So, and some fingerings for chords are quite difficult, and then the more pressure you're applying to the chord to try to get all the fingers in the right spot. And sometimes I watch people that are playing here, and I look and I see that the strings are stretched across the fretboard. So obviously that's changing the pitch of the chord. And if you play a bit of jazz, like I do, maybe you can get away with it on certain jazz chords. It doesn't affect you so much. But when you're playing lovely minor and major chords and other sorts of intervals, then your technique can have a big influence on how in tune the guitar will tend to want to sound. So, to show you a couple of other things as well, just the method for tuning. There's a lot of skills are being lost, I think, in these generations that we're growing up with. Skills like learning how to read maps because of GPSs, and people find it very hard to read maps these days. My kids were like that when they learn to drive. They have to rely on the GPS everywhere they go, whereas when we were growing up, we memorised the maps, we memorised the street directories, and we just knew where everything was. So tuning is one of those things. It's great to have electronic tuners, but really you do need to work your ear to get very accurate, because tuners will get you in the ballpark, but then you need to work with your own guitar to add the subtle variations to the tuning that just give you the sweet spot where your guitar will sound mostly in tune. So back in the day, there were all sorts of other devices used for tuning guitars. So some of these probably seem prehistoric to the younger generation, don't even know what they are, but this was the pitch pipe. So every folk guitarist had a pitch pipe in their guitar case back in the day, and so you just tuned your guitar roughly to those notes. And of course the old tuning fork, which has always existed for thousands of years probably, and so it could be then used to tune up. So that's A440. Anyway, so they're the sorts of things that we used to have to tune to, and then you just simply trained your ear. So I do encourage you, particularly if you're a younger player, then don't just rely on the tuner. Make sure you get practice at tuning. And there's different methods of tuning. Of course, we've got the normal fretted version. This guitar's got new strings on it, so they're still stretching in. But you can also use octaves as reference points, because if you're playing and you're going to record, you want the chord to sound sweet. You want the octave to be in tune as well. Sometimes the octave will sound like that. So you can also tune harmonically, where you can play the harmonic on the B string and then play the B at the 7th fret on the E string. That can sometimes give you an interesting point of reference. It's not necessarily foolproof, but it's also a good reference. Sometimes inaccuracies will start to show themselves further up the neck, and that methodology may or may not be helpful for you. But that's just one of the other methods that you can use for tuning. So I think that that covers a lot of what I wanted to say, and the only other thing I was going to add was that the psychology of tuning, as I was saying a bit earlier, that if you've got very good pitch, if you've got perfect pitch, it's probably more of a curse than a blessing. But if you got hopefully very good pitch, then you can use that pitch to advantage to try to get your instrument in tune as possible. But if you do have perfect pitch or very good pitch, and I've had people come and look at instruments here, and they cannot not hear out of tuneness, no matter how good the guitar is or how well, and they're just in turmoil because all they can hear is out of tuneness. So there comes a point where we have to deliberately make the choice to accept that there will be a certain amount of out of tuneness, and it may not be easy to necessarily adapt in that way. But if you do struggle with tuning and everything sounds out of tune to you, how you can begin to relax with that, and it's like looking at a tiled wall, and all you can see is the one tile that's misaligned down the bottom there, or looking at a big screen TV, and all you see is that one little pixel is black and not working down there. So sometimes we have to choose to see the big picture and not focus in on the fault. So it's the same with sound. We choose to hear and enjoy the wider spectrum of sound, getting our instruments as in tune as possible, getting good techniques so we don't push the instrument out of tune, and then just enjoying music for what it's worth and for the great blessing that it is to us. So I hope that may have been helpful to you. There's lots of other information on the internet to do with just tuning, just intonation, and equal temperament intonation. So there's lots of other things you can look up if you find that interesting. But I hope you've enjoyed this clip, and we'll catch you next time. Thanks everyone. Bye.